Now, starting out with the central nervous system, we're going to take a look at the nerves. So I was going to say, I'm like, well, we're going to start with the nerves. We're going to look at peripheral nervous system. Well, and central, mostly central. Looking at the nerves. So central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord. There are nerves that are coming off your spinal cord. A nerve is not the same thing as a neuron. A neuron is one single little cell. In lab, that's what we kind of briefly went over at the end of the skeletal system. Looks like that, little things coming off of it. That's a neuron. That's one single cell. It's got a nucleus in there. A nerve, it's a big bundle. It's a big cord-like bundle that is a bunch of all of these axons. So this is one neuron, one big long axon. Well, there could be another neuron right here. It's squiggles. And there's another axon. And there could be another one tucked right behind it. And there's another axon. What a nerve is, it's taking all of these axons all together and making one big, huge cord that runs through the nerve itself. Now, because of all those axons that are there, and because how we bundle them up, they do have coverings on all of them. And that's where we get those endo, the peri, and the epineurium. So starting on the very, very inside, there's one tiny little axon. And I know my next slides I have bigger pictures. But there's one tiny little axon. That's that little tiny axon. And most axons are covered in myelin sheaths. They're insulators for those electrical potentials. But there's one single axon. Now, to cover that axon, to protect it, to even ensure that electrical signal stays in there, the first covering we have is endoneurium. It's the most inside of all the coverings, which is why it gets the endo. Now we're going to take one big group of axons, all the axons. I drew 3. This is like, I don't know, 50. We're going to take all those axons and we're going to put it in a bundle called a fascicle. And around that bundle, we have what's known as the perineurium. Peri means around, like the perimeter of something goes around. Peri means around a fascicle. And then we're going to have several fascicles all bundled together. They have their own blood supply. And around all of those fascicles, we have one more covering, and that's the epineurium. Epi meaning on, it's on the top, it's on the surface, like your epidermis is on your outer surface. That epineurium is on the outside of your actual nerve. Now, there's an actual picture of it. Epineurium on the outside, one fascicle, and it's going to have its own perineurium. Each one of these is an axon, and you're going to have some myelin sheath, and around the outside you're going to have the endoneurium on the inside. What? I don't know. I'd have to look at the picture. Apparently it didn't tell me. If I had to guess, about 1,000 times. Maybe not quite. Now, because you've got lots of nerves, and I'm like, you don't have as many nerves as you do have neurons, but you do have a bunch of nerves, and we group them based on what kind of information is going through it. Is it going towards the spinal cord, or is it going away from the spinal cord? Sensory nerves send information to the spinal cord and up into the brain, to the central nervous system. Motor or efferent neurons send information away from the spinal cord or away from the brain. And then we have some nerves that are called mixed, which means they have neurons inside of them that can send information to the spinal cord and away. They can go both directions. Now, the sensory input, if it's going towards the spinal cord, it can go towards the spinal cord, it can go up in part of the brain stem, or it can go up all the way into the brain itself. Information will leave the spinal cord, it will leave the brain, it will leave the brain stem, and all leave out through one of those motor nerves. Now, a lot of your nerves are all, they're reflexes, meaning the information that travels to the spinal cord and then back to wherever it's supposed to go is all a reflex, which means the information that travels along the nerve never goes to the brain. There's no higher level thinking in a reflex. It's a reflex. The idea for reflexes is that they are inborn or intrinsic, which means you're born knowing how to do these. You never had to learn them. You never had to think about it. Over time, you can improve reflexes, but they're rapid, involuntary, predictable motor responses to some stimulus. The idea behind reflexes is most of them are life-saving things. If you touch something super hot, and I'm like, because I mentioned this last time, when you touch something hot, yes, you're right, electrical information has to travel along those neurons, but it's not going to go up into the brain, and you're going to sit there while you're touching something hot. What do you think I should do about it? Well, past experience has led me to believe that that might actually give me a burn, and maybe I should do something. We don't have the higher level thinking. That information goes to the spinal cord and goes right back. So there are some things that are straight up reflexes. And we're going to talk about some specific ones as well. Other ones coming up. But some reflexes help maintain your posture. They help you stand up, and you just don't fall over all the time. You're not, when I'm standing up here, I'm not thinking about it. I'm like, okay, I hope I don't tip over, and go to the right a little bit, go. I'm not thinking about it. That's all reflex. And I'm like, yes, some of the stuff can improve the more you walk around and stand up. I'm like, but most of you do that all the time anyways. They can control visceral activities, internal activities. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to tell your food when you eat. You should digest. It's all reflexes, things your body was born knowing how to do. Now, things can be modified by learning. Examples, driving skills. The more you drive, the more your body sees something and can react to it. And you practice that, you're faster at it. And I'm like, the more you drive, the faster you are at your reflexes. That if a kid comes out between cars, if you've got experience driving and you know that it's a possibility, you are faster at hitting the brakes. And I'm like, you don't have to think about it. Your body just automatically hits the brake if something comes out in front of you. So I'm like, some reflexes improve with practice. Now, the 5 parts of a reflex arc. Although you're not thinking about these things happening, they're happening. And there's 5 parts to a reflex, 5 parts that causes a reflex. One, you have to have some type of receptor, something that's there to receive some type of stimulus. And my example is I'm going to touch my hot stove. And I'm like, that means I have nerve endings on my fingers, on my hand, that's going to be able to sense the heat. So there's some type of stimulus that's going to sense a change. You're going to have a sensory neuron. So you are going to have cells that are going to transmit that information through your nerves to your spinal cord. Now, once they get to the spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system, depending on where they are, a monosynaptic means only one, why can't I think of the word? One synapse. And I'm like, which just means like one neuron talks to one neuron, and that's it. There's no other communication. It's monosynaptic. That information goes from one neuron to another. It goes from a sensory neuron to a motor neuron. Now, when I always think of motor is when you motor along, you're moving along, you're actually going to make something happen. A motor neuron is you're going to cause something to happen. Sensory, you sense something. I sense something hot, and I can have one neuron that sensed something was hot to tell a motor neuron you should do something about that. A polysynaptic, which means you have multiple neurons communicating, saying there's lots of hot stuff, you should do something. But that motor neuron is eventually going to send that electrical impulse out to some type of effector organ that can do something about the fact that you touch something hot. And so your effector organ is the part of your body that can do something. It can react to it, and for us it would be skeletal muscles and pulling your hand away. Now again, this all happens very, very quickly, and you have no thought about it. You touch something hot, you pulled your hand away. And you think about it later, well, that was not very smart. So all the parts, you have a receptor. That one isn't like a needle is stabbing you or a pin. And I'm like, but you have some type of receptor. It's going to send the information along a sensory neuron, which is going to be part of a nerve, to the spinal cord. And I'm like, and the sensor information goes into the spinal cord. There's no higher level thinking. The integration, the thinking, if you want to call it thinking, is right there at the spinal cord. It's going to send the information along a motor neuron, found in a motor nerve, out to the effector organ of your skeletal muscle. And whether it's, pull your hand away from the pin or pull your hand away from the hot stove, it all happens very, very quickly. Now, the components of your reflex arc, well, depending on what the output, what is the effector organ, Depends on how we classify these. If your reflex is some type of skeletal muscle, pulling your hand away from something, we call it a somatic reflex. We're going to pull our hand away. We're going to control our muscles, pull our hand away. If the reflex means you're going to affect any kind of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or any type of gland, then we call it an autonomic or a visceral reflex. And I'm like, that when reflexes happen, it could speed your heart up, could slow your heart down, it could cause different parts of your digestive tract to shut down, because we'll talk about some more of this in a little bit. I'm like, but if your effector organs are smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, and I'm like, we just call it as an autonomic reflex. Now, our spinal reflexes, even the somatic, ones that control your skeletal muscle, all happen in the spinal cord. But we can test how well your nervous system is working by testing your reflexes. We know what's going to happen to certain parts of your body if we touch or manipulate parts of your body in different ways. And if all of a sudden your body reacts in an exaggerated fashion, some type of distorted fashion, or that reflex is absent, we know there's going to be some type of damage to the spinal cord somewhere. If they ever think there's neurological damage after some type of car accident, or if they think there's neurological damage because of some type of neurological disease, they're going to be constantly checking reflexes, looking to see, do we get the reactions we want in your skeletal muscles? Now, some ones that we can test quite easily, we group them into pairs. And I'm like, the first one is called the stretch and tendon reflex. Means one, we're going to stretch out a muscle and we'll see what the reaction is. And the other one's a tendon, which we're going to create tension. They both start with a T. And the tendon reflexes, we're going to create tension on a muscle and look to see what happens. Then we'll have the flexor and cross-extensors, and then our superficial ones we can see from the skin. So the stretch reflex, I'm like, well, both of these that are grouped together, the stretch is we are going to stretch the length of the muscle spindles. We are going to stretch your skeletal muscle. Now, what happens if you stretch your muscle too much? It could tear, which we don't want that to happen. So reflex is going to try to prevent that from happening. It's going to try to prevent the muscle from stretching too much. So it's called the stretch reflex. Same thing. If you increase the tension too much on a muscle, especially in the tendon, you could tear a tendon. And so we're going to try to prevent that from happening. Now, looking at the first one, the stretch reflex. You guys gone to the doctor and they take the little thing and they hit your knee? What happens to your knee? It kicks out. You're like, well, that's so cool. There's a reason for it. The idea is what they're trying to hit is they're trying to hit that patellar ligament that goes from the patella, we'll review from lab this week, goes right from the patella down to the tibia. What happens when you hit the patellar ligament? It's going to pull on the patella, and it's going to pull on your quadriceps muscles, the whole group of them, because they're all attached. And I'm like, at the end they are. So when we stretch that muscle, when you hit the patellar ligament, you hit it, it stretches this muscle. Now, because we don't want to stretch that muscle, what are we going to do? I was going to say you're going to try to contract the muscle, and when you contract that muscle, your foot kicks out. That's the idea for the stretch reflex. When you stretch certain muscles, certain parts of muscles, the automatic reflex will be the opposite, is to contract them, to not stretch them anymore. Now, what has to happen? So you're stretching it, that's the blue information, is telling your spinal cord, hey, it's getting stretched. It sends information, the pink line, to the quadriceps, contract the muscle. But now, when your top muscle contracts, you also have to tell some information to the muscles in the back of the leg. Okay, well, you need to relax because the top muscles are going to contract. And so it does tell information to your hamstrings, just relax, because we're going to contract the top muscles. So when you stretch, we're going to contract. Now, the tendon reflex is going to do a little bit of the opposite. Instead of stretching, we're going to contract the muscle. Like, we're going to pull on the muscle. And again, if you pull too much on the tendon, if you create too much tension on the tendon, it could damage the tendon. It could cause it to tear off the bone. And so what our body does is it causes the relaxation. And so when you have the contraction of the muscle, And I'm like, it's going to activate the tendon reflex, which is going to make that contracting muscle relax, and then the other muscle on the other side will contract to try to straighten it back out. Now, I'm like, I got a picture. And I'm like, the idea is that it prevents too much damage to excessive stretch on your tendons. So for this, we're going to contract your quadriceps. You went to the gym and you're like, no, I want nice big quadriceps. That's my deep workout voice. You want really nice, big, deep, I'm like, nice, big quads, and you're working the machine and you're putting lots of tension. You are making that muscle contract a lot. That's putting a lot of tension on that tendon right there, which if you put enough tension on there, it's going to tear. And so Reflex has it that information, that really tight tendon, is going to send information to the spinal cord. It's going to tell that muscle you're contracting to relax. And it will tell, because that will stretch that out, which means it's going to make the hamstring contract. So as you're trying to do these nice, tough muscles on your quadriceps, we're like, no, that's not going to happen. It causes that muscle to relax and these muscles to contract to pull it back. Now, so you don't cause that high tension. Now, the other two both have to, well, my examples are usually arm examples, but one's called a flexor reflex. What happens when you flex a muscle or a joint? It's like you decrease an angle when you flex your muscle. Now, the flexor reflex means you're going to decrease an angle somewhere, and you're going to try to withdraw that part of your body away from something that could be painful, such as that hot stove. It's always because it's it's a protective reflex. You're touching hot stove, we don't want to burn all your skin off. Now, my note, so it's just cause an automatic withdrawal of that body part. Your brain can override that to an extent. I mean, if you wanted to, you're like, no, I'd like to burn all my skin off, and you put it on the hot stove, and you're crazy on a couple levels. And I'm like, but, you could try to think about it and override it. Same thing, a finger stick for a blood test. That's going to hurt. You know it does. It always does. And I'm like, you've got lots of nerve endings there. You know it's going to hurt. Your reflex is to pull it away. Your brain can override it, and you're like, I'm going to hold my finger there and go through pain. Even though I'm like, I have people when they do, they're like, no, oh my God, no, and they freak out. And I'm like, but in theory, you should be able to override it. But it is a reflex to pull your hand away from anything that hurts. The cross-extensor, it works with two muscles. So you're going to have a flexing and you're going to have an extensing. And it's called the cross-extensor, because while one part of your body flexes, the other side of the body, the opposite side of the body, is going to do an extension. It always happens with generally with some type of pain. And the one example they have for this is if you're walking around barefoot and you step on glass, what's your foot that just stepped on glass going to want to do? Pick it up. It's going to flex off of that. But that means all of your weight, as you pull off of one, has to go on the other leg, so that the other side of your body, the other leg, has to make sure it's extended out to withstand that extra weight that you put on it. So as one side of the body flexes, the other side of the body is going to extend. Now, this can happen with your arms too. I don't know, you could try this at home on someone. They might not like you. But the idea is if you've got two arms and if you're walking along, if someone comes up and grabs you, this is why you could try this at home. If someone comes up and grabs your arm, your first instinct is to do what with that arm? Pull it away. You're like, holy cow, don't touch my arm. But whether you realize it or not, your other arm, other side of the body, will extend. That if someone comes up and grabs your arm, you're going to pull it away, but your other arm will go out. You could try it on someone, but again, be prepared to get hit with that other arm. And I'm like, but it's a natural reflex that as one arm pulls, the other arm will go out. Just careful. Now, our superficial reflexes, these are all ones that we can see when you touch certain parts of the skin. So these are all cutaneous reflexes, which means if there are certain parts of the skin you touch, you can actually see reflexes in your skeletal muscle happen. Now, the first one's called a plantar reflex. Where do you think that happens? On your foot. And the other one's an abdominal reflex, and I have two little short videos of both of these. I don't know if they have audio or not. It doesn't matter. The plantar reflex, we're going to see which video works. The plantar reflex is going to look to test the integrity of your spinal cord below that fourth lumbar vertebrae. Now, it's technically not considered, you know, your spinal cord that low, but you still have lots and lots of nerves. We're going to be looking at the nerves, the integrity of those nerves way down at the bottom of the spinal cord. Now, what they do, and usually they're testing for people that have had neurological, you know, spinal cord damage, is that they stroke the lateral aspect of the sole of the foot. Where is that? What's the lateral? The outside. So they are going to stroke the outside of the foot. Now, I'm like, you could try this at home on someone. If you stroke the outside on the bottom part of your foot, your reflex is to flex your toes down. Like, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to flex down. And if you're like, oh yeah, anyone touches my foot and your toes curl in, that's a reflex that happens. That means, you know, your spinal cord and your nerves are working really well right there. Now, if they don't work, if that doesn't flex down, it's called a Babinski sign, which means there's damage right there. I don't remember which video. One of them shows that.
We're now going to do the plantar reflex. Well, just hold still. Try not to pull back. Just relax as much as you can.
That sounds like if it doesn't have audio, I don't care. He's going to take his little thing and
the
he's
lateral
going to
aspect of the foot
lateral, outside,
and across the wall of the foot.
And your job is to watch what just happened. The toes, it's not.
Do it over here on this
the
side.
toes will curl under.
Same thing. Just relax.
Now,
There you go.
and I'm like, where one foot does it and one foot doesn't, it's weird. And I'm like, there's that flexing in. That's what's supposed to happen. The other superficial reflex is called the abdominal reflex. It's because you can actually stroke different parts of your stomach and actually watch your muscles contract. And if you're like, oh yeah, if I do touch that, they do automatically. If you didn't, well, that's a reflex that's making that happen, whether you ever thought about it or not. And it's testing the integrity of your spinal cord anywhere from your 8th thoracic vertebrae to your 12th thoracic vertebrae. And so they just stroke different parts of the skin, starting at the belly button, and they're looking for just the muscle contraction. Now, the video that I found, I'm like, I mean, you can see it, but it's not a huge...
T5 to T12, we're going to stroke the skin towards the umbilicus and watch for a contraction of the muscles. In the epigastric area, I'm going to stroke towards the umbilicus, watch it contract. That's from T5 to T7. T7 to T9, the upper right quadrant, scratch towards the umbilicus, watch it contract. Just lateral to the umbilicus is approximately T9 to T11. And then from the inguinal region up towards the umbilicus, watch it contract, is approximately T10 to T12.
You can watch them. I'll put them online. Now, the spinal cord itself begins at the foramen magnum. Where's that? The big hole at the bottom of your skull. It begins at the foramen magnum. It goes all the way down to about the second lumbar vertebrae. Then we don't technically call it spinal cord. Yes, there's still lots of spinal nerves coming off there, but we don't call it cord anymore. Main function, two-way communication. It can send information to the brain if it wants to, or if it just stays at the spinal cord, it's a reflex. And so that's where it has all those spinal reflex centers. Now, there's your whole spinal cord, all of the yellow. Now, my note on the spinal cord is the width changes in different parts on the spinal cord. It gets a little wider up where it says cervical enlargement, and it gets a little wider right down here where it says lumbar enlargement. So it gets wider, then it gets narrower, and then it gets a little bit wider again. Any guess why there's two enlargements? Up near the top, near the lower. There are more nerves. Any guess where those nerves go? Yes, to your arms and legs. There's additional nerves coming off right there that are going to go to your arms, and additional nerves coming off right there that are going to go to your legs. And so it does get a little bit wider for those nerves, and then it gets back narrower. It's not too much exciting going on right here. And then it gets a little bit wider again for your leg nerves. Altogether, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. If you have to take advanced A&P, you can learn all 31 and exactly what they do. I don't go over those in this class. But there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that do come off of the spinal cord itself. And yes, there are those two enlargement for the nerves that serve the limbs. At the very bottom part of the spinal cord, where we don't call it a cord anymore, although there's still lots of nerves, this is the bottom of the spinal cord, and then it starts to almost fray out. These are the actual nerves coming off. These are spinal cord. This bottom collection of nerves that's coming off the bottom of the spinal cord is called the cauda equina. Now, does anyone know when we're talking equine, what are we talking about? Horses. Now, caudal fin on a fish, where is that? Anyone know? It's the back fin, it's the tail fin. And I'm like, cauda means tail, so the bottom part of our spinal cord means horsetail. And I'm like, and you're like, oh yeah, horse's tail, it's all, you know, long and flowy. Well, the bottom part of your spinal cord, apparently it's long and flowy and looks like a horsetail. So we called it cauda equina. Now, if we're going to look inside the spinal cord, and in lab next week, we're going to look inside the spinal cord, or at least talk about the different parts of the spinal cord. There are two sections to the spinal cord, you know, and here a left and a right. There are two spots. They do have fissures on either side that divide, so it is like two separate, but they're connected together, parts of your spinal cord. We have gray mass. I know it looks tan on this picture, it's grayish. And I'm like, we have a gray matter or gray mass on the inside, and we also have white matter that surrounds all of it. That's what the inside of your spinal cord looks like. And again, here are your nerves that are coming off of them, and there's 31 pairs. There's one pair. There's your big zoomed in, what your spinal cord looks like. Again, we have two sections. You have your gray matter, although it looks tan. Your gray matter kind of in the middle, and it's covered all with your white matter. The white matter is myelin. I'm like, I know it's coming up in another slide, but it's myelin. It's that electrical impulse insulation. Now, the gray matter part, although it looks tan, the gray matter part, and in lab we're going to label these parts on the spinal cord. You have a dorsal horn and a ventral horn, and some parts of your spinal cord you have a ventral horn. Now, the horns kind of just mean the spikes. Oh, I'm too short, but I'm like, there's a bottom spike and a top spike and a side spike. Those are the horns. And you've got one on each side. The dorsal roots, and I'm like, is what's coming out of the spinal cord. I'm going to say I'm too short, but the dorsal roots are what's coming out on the back side. Dorsal root ganglion, I need my pointer. Means a little bundle of nerve bodies. That it gets really thick right there. It gets really thick right there. That's your dorsal root ganglion. It's where you have the cell bodies. It's where you have the cell bodies of all those neurons hanging out. So they're a little bit wider and bunched up right there. The dorsal root is this part. It comes out on the back side. And I'm like, same thing, dorsal root ganglion. There's a ventral root as well. It just means the one on the front side of the spinal cord. Now, all that white matter that's in there, that's your myelinated nerve fibers, what makes it appear white. There are also non-myelinated nerve fibers as well. Main reason is we have to send electrical impulses. That's the whole job of the spinal cord. Information goes into the spinal cord, we have to send it up to the brain for thinking, unless it's a reflex, but then we have to send it right back down, and we have to get it out to wherever it needs to go. That has to happen very, very quickly. We have to have lots of electrical signals happening inside the spinal cord. A lot of that has to be covered in myelin to support, I don't want to say support, but I'm like to insulate that moving of electrons and moving of ions. And then you have non-myelinated, because you still sometimes need to just have really fast information, and we don't want myelin anywhere around. We just want to be able to skip right over it. Now, it does run, all of that white matter, I'm going to go back, all of that white matter runs in 3 directions. So all of the white matter runs in 3 directions. So sometimes you can almost see it looks streaked, but we make a cross-section through it. Some of this is going to run straight up towards the brain, because we want to send information there. Some of the white matter runs downward, because we have to send information out to wherever it's going to happen. And some of the information goes left to right. Depends on what side of the body we need to control information. We have to send it from one side to the other. So I'm like, we have white matter that runs in all the directions, up, down, and side to side. Now, we also divide, just like we had gray matter, or we had little spikes or little horns that they call them horns, I don't know. And I'm like, that stuck out. Our white matter, we divided into 3 groups. They call them columns. I don't know where they get the names. Officially, they're called funiculi, columns. On each side, there's going to be a dorsal side, a ventral side, and a lateral side. It's like 3 sections of white matter on each side. Now, 4 basic regions. I know I have more pictures in this because I didn't like the book pictures. There are 4 basic regions of spinal cord. There is spinal cord in your cervical vertebrae, in your thoracic vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae, and sacral, although we're getting to more nerves in the sacral than lumbar. Just looking at the gray matter, the dark part on these images, does the gray matter look identical in all the sections? No, it varies. Depending on what kind of information is going in and going out and how fast we have to send it, the gray matter varies. Sometimes we need more white matter than gray matter. Also, if you notice, are they the same width? No. And that upper, that cervical vertebrae, top thoracic is wide. And again, that's where you have lots of information that has to go out to the arms. And that lumbar gets a little bit wider because you've got all those nerves that have to go out to the legs. Again, 31 nerves that exit the cord. 31. Yay if you have to take advance. Now, some review. Pink, orange, yellow, or green. I know, find them. I was like, and now you have it, Ebony. Yay. Now you have yours. The perineurium, and again, thinking what peri means, does what? I don't know the answers. What It's not pink. Everyone's like, oh man, it's not pink. I'll talk about why it's not pink. It's the yellow. Perineurium goes around fascicles. The pink encloses all the fascicles to form the whole nerve. What goes around all the fascicles to form the whole nerve? It goes around everything. That's the epineurium. That's what everyone's like, oh, but I saw the word fascicle. I know, I did that to be tricky. The perineurium just goes around groups, bundles, little fascicles. It goes around groups of fibers. This portion of the spinal cord controls muscle movement. Oh, I didn't tell you, so well, let's just see if you can guess. Because then I'll tell you why. I might go back a second. Let's say I got a little wired. Yay for anyone that put pink, ventral. I'm going to go back a minute to, we'll go to that one, the spinal cord. And I'm like, there is a back side of the spinal cord, there is a front side of the spinal cord. Information goes in the back and comes out the front, always. And I'm like, so information, meaning sensory information, is always going to go in the back of the spinal cord and out the front. So if you're controlling muscles to do something, it's coming out the front. Quickly lifting your foot and leg after stepping on a rock is an example of what? Everyone's like, there was one specific one. You're right, there is one specific. It's called an intrinsic reflex. Which one specifically? Yes, maybe. It could be. But if you're stepping on something like a rock, which is going to hurt, and you are going to pull your foot away, what else will happen? Yeah, so that's the flex and extensor. I'm like, it might be, but normally if you would only pull it away, you might fall. You're right, you're going to pull it away. The length of a muscle is communicated to the brain via a what? The length. So the fact that your muscle is going to change length. Let's see if you can get it. A couple of these I never talked about, so it's not going to be an option. Sounds like, oh, I didn't mention those things at all. I was like, which most of you did get it down. It's pink or yellow because I didn't mention anything about orange or green. It's the pink one. Length is communicated by the muscle spindles if you're pulling on the spindles. The yellow, what did I say? Sorry. And I'm like, not the pink. It's the yellow. Muscle spindles always detect length. Tendons detect tension when you're pulling on them. Tendons for tension, muscle spindles, I think they've got an L in there for length. So that's when you stretch the muscle spindles, you stretch the muscles, that's when it's going to want to pull. A tendon reflex involves what? They all look, they're like, oh, they all look the same. They're not. And my first, I'm like, a tendon reflex always is because of tension, too much tension on the tendon. And if you have too much tension on the tendon, you're going to want to cause muscle relaxation and then lengthening. That was the tendon. If you were pulling on your quadriceps because you're lifting weights and you are just lifting something way heavier than you should be, that's too much tension on that tendon. You could break it. So we need to relax it, and then we need to lengthen that muscle back out because you were shortening it to create the tension. That's right. The cross-extensor reflex is important when? The green one. The cross-extensor, again, it means something's going to, yes, extend, but it's also something's going to have the opposite on the other side or across the body. When you step barefoot on the sharp object, you will flex, but on the other side of the body, you're going to extend. Now, let's see how far we'll get to the autonomic nervous system. I like the autonomic. I didn't know how far I was going to get. I don't know if it's the... Oh, I didn't think it even opened up because I was like, well, I'll record it and I'll just have it not open until 4. Well, yay, apparently I didn't have it open right. Well, I'm still going to go over it, so you're stuck listening to it twice. Autonomic nervous system, and again, I always think autonomic sounds like automatic, which means do you have control over it? No. And I'm like, that's the autonomic nervous system. You don't have any control over it. Autonomic sounds like automatic. And so the autonomic nervous system consists of motor neurons that innervate your smooth muscle, you don't have control over. Your cardiac muscle, you don't have control over. And all your glands, you don't have control over. Now, the idea for all of it is to keep us alive. That's the part of the autonomic nervous system, is all these things, your cardiac muscle, your smooth muscle, even your glands, keep us alive. They all operate under subconscious control, which means you don't have to think about it because you would spend your entire day telling your heart just to beat. We don't have to think about it. It just happens automatically. Sometimes the autonomic nervous system is called the involuntary nervous system because you don't have control. Sometimes it's called the general visceral motor system. It's got several names. Now, peripheral nervous system. This is one of those questions on that quiz. And I'm like, different divisions of the peripheral nervous system. There is a sensory division, which had 2 other subdivisions. That's not on this one. A motor division, which means we're going to do something about it. You know, like you saw something, you sensed. Well, now we're going to do something about something, whatever it is you sensed. Well, of your motor efferent division, we're going to do something. Some of it is the somatic, which is skeletal muscle, which you have control over. Your autonomic nervous system, though, you have no control over whatsoever. And the autonomic nervous system is further divided into two more subdivisions, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic division. Now, I like this. I think I stole it back out of, like, I don't know, maybe a prep book. Your autonomic nervous system. If you saw a bear, yes, you have to sense it. You heard it, you smelled it, you saw it, whatever. That's all sensory. That information goes to the spinal cord for processing of, oh my God, there's a bear. That sends it out to the motor division. Part of the motor division controls your skeletal muscle, and you might run. Or you might do what you're supposed to and, like, I don't know, curl up in a ball. But some of that information also goes to your autonomic nervous system, which you have no control over. That includes your cardiac muscle, your smooth muscle, and your glands. What's going to happen to your heart rate if you see a bear? I was going to start to beat like crazy. And I'm like, these are all things out of your control. And I'm like, well, because we'll talk about some of the other ones. Now, the somatic that controls the skeletal muscle is different than the autonomic. They both have motor fibers. They're both going to cause something to happen. However, what they affect are different. And I'm like, one is skeletal muscle, one is glands, or smooth muscle, or cardiac muscle. They have different pathways to get out to there, and they might have different neurotransmitters. Skeletal muscle always is controlled by a chemical called acetylcholine. I'm like, well, there are different types of neurotransmitters that are going to have other effects, other types of chemicals that are going to cause your smooth muscles and your heart muscle to contract or not contract. Now, your somatic nervous system, skeletal muscle. Autonomic is what we care about, cardiac, smooth, and glands. Review. Again, division of the autonomic, sympathetic and parasympathetic. My only note, almost every organ in your body is controlled by both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. They usually do opposite things of each other, but they generally are controlled by both, where one is going to cause your heart to speed up, one is going to cause your heart to relax. So they have dual innervation from both systems. They're usually antagonistic, means just one increases, one does the opposite. They usually cause opposite responses. Now, the parasympathetic division. This is the one, it's the rest and digest. And I'm like, it's just there to maintain your body's normal functions. So that's digestion, diuresis, that's making urine, defecation. And I'm like, it's just your body's normal functions. I'm like, you don't have to think about any of it. That's all autonomic. And it's the parasympathetic part that's controlling all of those normal body functions. And I'm like, so when you're relaxing, reading a book after a meal, and I'm like, it's keeping everything low. Why expend energy if we don't have to? So it keeps your blood pressure low, your heart rate low. And while you're sitting there after eating and relaxing, that is when your digestion is up. It's like, okay, well, we don't need to put any energy elsewhere. Let's digest that food that you just got done eating. The opposite, the sympathetic, is your fight or flight response. When you're under stress. I always think stress for sympathetic. They both start with an S. You're under stress. You saw the bear. Various things that will happen when you're under stress. Increased heart rate, dry mouth, cold, sweaty skin, dilated pupils, increased metabolic rate of cells, which means your cells are going to go through metabolism really fast. You're going to have to raise blood glucose levels. You got to make sure all of your body gets sugar, especially your muscles if we're going to want them to work. We mobilize fats to use as fuel. If you have to run from a bear, hopefully you now have the energy to be able to do that. And so I'm like, we're going to literally, it's the fight or flight response. Now, during vigorous physical activity, so I'm like, whether you're running from a bear or even just regular basic, you're working out doing vigorous activity, we're going to shunt blood from your skeletal muscles and the heart. And I'm like, meaning we're going to send lots of blood there. We need lots of oxygen to those places because they're consuming a lot of oxygen. We're going to dilate your bronchioles. Where are those? In your lungs. What does dilate mean? Open. We want to make them even larger. Because again, you're going to be, you're doing some type of physical activity, whether it's just exercising physically or running from a bear, but you need lots of oxygen. And so we're going to dilate your bronchioles, and we're going to cause your liver to release that glucose, so everything in your body has the sugar available to do whatever it is you want it to do. Now, this is showing that, how your muscles have dual innervation. Now, Mike, your stomach has the blue. All blue things are parasympathetic. All the green thing is sympathetic. No, you're not going to have a diagram like this on your exam. It's just to show you dual innervation. My only note. So you have some of your parasympathetic controlling your stomach. You also have sympathetic controlling your stomach. However, and I'm like, so you see these lined up, almost on, the same muscle or the same organs on either side. However, where are the nerves coming from for the parasympathetic? Up near the brain and way low down at the spinal cord. Where are the nerves coming from for the sympathetic? Kind of right in the middle. And I'm like, why is that? I could make hypothetical, guesses that it was like, well, sympathetic, you're stressed. Hopefully the nerves are right there close to them. Maybe. And I'm like, either way, you have dual innervation. You have the parasympathetic controlling these organs. You also have the sympathetic controlling these organs. The nerves that control them are in different places of the spinal cord. Different book, picture, same thing. Here's your sympathetic. There's your parasympathetic. So most have dual innervation. Again, your sympathetic, when you're under stress, will increase your heart rate. It will also inhibit digestion. And this is why I'm like, it cracks me up, but everyone does it. If someone's under a lot of stress, like life and death stress, are they hungry? No. So if someone's at the hospital because their kid just got in a car accident, or their husband's in a car accident, and they don't know if they're living or dying, what is everyone trying to do for them? Bring them food. Are they hungry? No. And I'm like, they are so stressed out that they're going to lose their loved one. When you are under high stress environment, you are not digesting. You are not hungry, but everyone wants to feed those people. And so I was like, yeah, whatever. It's a nice gesture. But when you're under a lot of stress, you're not hungry because you're not digesting. The big thing is when you're under a lot of stress, we're not just talking, I've got a test tomorrow. And I'm like, if you're under a lot of stress, I'm like, the idea is why we're not digesting is we're taking all that energy and putting it elsewhere in the body. And I'm like, we're trying to put all that energy into, your body doesn't know it's, someone in the hospital. Your body is just like, I'm just under a lot of stress, and I don't know if I have to run, and I don't know if I have to fight someone. And so we're going to put all that energy into other parts of the body. The book is a nice little, the dual innervation, how one does one thing and the other one does the other. Now, what controls all the autonomic nervous system? The boss of your autonomic nervous system is the hypothalamus. It's even called in your book the boss. They have it in the diagram. It's the boss of your autonomic nervous system. So, and I'm like, it controls your heart activity, your blood pressure, your body temperature, water balance, emotional stages, fight or flight system. It controls your autonomic nervous system. And I'm like, the hypothalamus. In lab next week, we'll look at where is the hypothalamus on the brain. And I'll have another t-shirt. And I'm like, hypothalamus, really? It's right in this region. But yes, even as your book, it's the boss of the autonomic nervous system that controls all of it. Now, because I'm like, I knew I was going to get close. Of course, you have to end on aging sucks, and this is why. Some things as you get older that happens to the autonomic nervous system. Constipation happens. Again, digestion, smooth muscle aids in digestion. As you get older, that controlling of the smooth muscle to cause food to go through slows down as well, increases constipation. Dry eyes, that's all part of your autonomic nervous system, slows down. You can also develop something known as orthostatic hypotension, which is really long, but some of you may have already experienced this as you're getting older. It's where when you are sitting down and you stand up really fast and you get dizzy. Has that happened? And you're like, whoa. It's called orthostatic hypotension. And you're like, whoa. It's not that bad. It just means all of a sudden you have a low blood pressure after a position change. You went from sitting to standing, and your blood pressure dropped really quickly, just very fast. It regulates itself. As you get older, that increases, though, how often that happens. It would depend. And I'm like, is that something they're always doing? Like always changing positions that they want on it? Maybe. would need more information? For blood clotting? Yep, that would all, especially that would increase the blood clotting. Now, I want to get you guys out of here because I know it's like right at 4 o'clock, so I want to tell you the answers. The synonym for the autonomic nervous system, involuntary, because you don't have control over the autonomic. Regulation of the heart rate at low levels, parasympathetic, you're at rest. In general, the sympathetic, yes, blah, 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 it's the sympathetic. Why it makes sense is because the sympathetic stress activates the body for physical activity. That's why you don't digest. Area that receives no innervation by the parasympathetic nervous system. Your sweat glands. You're not sweating under stress or when you're at rest. You know, yes, if you're hot, but you're not just sweating. The sympathetic is involved in all of those things. At the top of the autonomic nervous system is your hypothalamus, and I think that was the end. And we finished. I knew we'd come close. Now, things to do before I see you.